Welcome to another episode of Gamebound. Today, I am not joined by Dan, my usual co-host. This is
Ian. I'm sure you'll see me once in a while. I am always around.
Correction, he is Ian at large.
Da 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 da.
And today we're going to be covering the top 5 controllers in gaming. Coming in at number 5 is the DualShock controller from PlayStation 1, 2,
and 3.
Let's cover the basic comfort of a DualShock. It's pretty ergodynamic. Everything's exactly where it needs to be. The face buttons are here. The handles direct your fingers right into it. Nice triggers. Holding it like this is a little uncomfortable, but aside from that, everything is where it needs to be.
Greatest thing about it is you actually don't need both fingers, because with this you can go up or down, so it's very versatile that way. Anyone who plays Call of Duty knows that this is at an arm's reach. You just literally push anything and it's right there.
Yeah, it's very good for racing games, very good for arcade games. Everything's exactly where you need it. The twin sticks, it's very symmetrical.
Another thing is it's also compact, so it's not some bulky thing that you're holding. Because it's so close, a lot of the times, especially in Call of Duty and games like that, you get frustrated, and your first instinct is to either throw it away or really just kind of crush it. But because it's so compact, you can't really crush it or destroy it. I think they built it for that.
Yeah, it has a lot of durability for sure. Unlike the 6-axis, I forget what game I was playing with the 6-axis controller, but I just got really mad. I was just gripping the controller. I was like, God fucking damn it! And it snapped in half because there's not a whole lot to it. It's not. I think it was not built as well. The rumble's not in there. I don't know what else, but it feels really light and fragile. And it just a $60 controller just snapped in my hand because this was before the DualShock 3 came out, and I was like, oh. Fuck, I know my friend's $60.
Honestly, I enjoy these controllers. The only bad part that I've found, that apparently not a lot of people have found, the analog sticks sometimes, I can feel this one, you can feel a little bit of a grinding when you're going back and forth. Something has gotten underneath it, just to the edge, and you're grinding it as you're going. So, analog sticks are good, especially with the dual, but I don't know. I find they can be overdone by just a little crumb.
Yeah, it definitely shows wear and tear for sure, but this PlayStation...
Overall, this will last years.
Oh yeah, DualShock is from 1997. I believe that's when it came out, 97 or 98, and this is still pristine condition. Now obviously that means you have to take care of it, but you should always take care of yourself. That goes without saying.
For all those people out there, don't be one of those people that wrap the cord around the controller. Do not do that.
That will fray your wire. So generally you just bundle it up, use an elastic band, or some other type of knotting. Just do not wrap it around. That's very bad. It'll fray at the controller right there. Very bad. Now, I've seen some other people cover the best controllers, and they always miss one of the most comfortable controllers, and that's the Virtual Boy controller. The system is horrible. We all know this. Nintendo's first major failure in the video game world, but this controller is so fucking comfortable. I cannot get over that. As you can see, well, you might not be able to, but there's a bunch of dust on here, because who plays Virtual Boy, really? As you can see, it has nice ridges, exactly where your hand should be, actually a little bit up here. Triggers on the bottom. Dual directional pads, exactly where your thumbs should be, so this is almost meant for first-person shooters, because it puts your thumbs exactly, if only these were joysticks, or thumbsticks. That would be phenomenal, but everything's, again, symmetrical. Controller does not have a lot of weight to it unless you put in the, 6 double A's for this goddamn battery? Yeah, 6 double A's. Then it has some hefty weight to it. It's a very ergonomical controller, and it's just made to fit. Even with people with big hands like myself, and I imagine you have big hands because you're a big guy.
See, now again, we've got to the spacing. It's got a decent amount of spacing, and I do enjoy that the buttons... See, the thing, it's not a trigger. Your hand doesn't have to kind of bend this way to hit a trigger. It's actually built so that you're pushing the buttons and the buttons pretty much at the same time.
Yep.
My only problem with that is you can probably accidentally press a few buttons.
Maybe.
But it happens. It's for comfortability. It's not really for purpose because it's a Virtual Boy.
One thing that I want to mention is why a lot of people forget the Virtual Boy controller is because
it's a Virtual Boy.
It's a Virtual Boy. It had one good game, Wario Land. That's it. There were no games to actually take advantage of this awesome controller design that has not been mimicked to this day. And that's a damn shame, because that was the only thing that the Virtual Boy did right was its controller. Durability, well, I've never heard of a broken Virtual Boy controller personally, but then again, who's going to play it that long?
True.
So it's
And again,
kind of a
it's-
cheap win.
Yeah. 1/4-inch plastic. This thing is almost solid plastic here. It's not going anywhere. You can't break anything. There's no joysticks to kind of screw around with. I've never heard of anyone breaking a D-pad in my life. And
That's true.
aside from that, all that's left is buttons. So you can't really break it unless you get pissed and throw it somewhere because it's a Virtual Boy. But aside from that,
Generally, if you wear it around your head like you're supposed to and you throw the controller, you're just going to go, duh!
I enjoy the 64. I'm sure if you're watching this, you game. And 64 was probably the bread and butter of your childhood. So this is the N64 controller for anyone who's not familiar with it. It again has the nice grip. It kind of looks a little weird with the middle dong thing here, but it needs placement for the joystick. The joystick being the only downfall of this controller, because with the introduction of the game Mario Party, they broke like that. No other game was as joystick intense as that game, as you can recall.
That was the worst, putting blisters on your hands. Parents actually complained to Nintendo, and if you sent a letter, not even an email back then, this was in the late 90s, to Nintendo, they would actually send you gloves to wear when you specifically play Mario Party, or Wario Party as I like to call it, and to cover your hands from any blisters, doing this, up and down, in circles.
Any other, like, if that game was never introduced, these controllers would have lasted your life. Now, this is the first kind of system that really brought in the camera buttons.
Yes, as you said, first controller to introduce C buttons, which are generally the precursor to having a second analog stick. It would have been a hell of a lot better having that second analog stick, but Nintendo was ahead of the game in that remark. Mainly to control the camera in Super Mario 64, used in other platformers such as Banjo-Kazooie in that regard. But it was ditched in a lot of games, like in Ocarina of Time, it's meant for items. And it's meant for other uses in Mischief Makers as well, and some other titles that I can't remember what the C buttons are used for.
Now, the only other thing about this, now, usually it was held like this to optimize the controls. You had your joystick and you had your buttons. This one was kind of the forgotten left cousin. It was kind of the middle toe.
I can't remember the D-pad being used in. Well, same with the L button. Like, what games really use that?
Yeah, so all in all, just for looks, and it's the forgotten left cousin, because basically all you needed was this. Comfortability, I would rate this at probably, I would give this a 6.5.
But one thing I also want to note is N64 introduced the trigger. Shoulder buttons were introduced with the Super Nintendo, and Nintendo amped up that by introducing the Z button, not the Z button, you silly Americans, I'm watching you, but the Z button, the first trigger, and it made playing first-person shooters a little bit better.
Or Mario Kart.
Coming in at number 2 is my personal favorite controller, and that is the Sega Genesis controller, but specifically the 6-button Sega Genesis controller, because I'm a huge fighting game fan and I'm a huge arcade fan. And this is, to me, the perfect controller for fighting games because it has 6 face buttons. Now, while the N64 that we just covered has 6 face buttons, they're not exactly aligned to be used as 6 face buttons quickly for fighting games. So obviously, you know, A, B, and C for kicks, and X, Y, and Z for punches. It just works. This has an arcade feel, and this has my personal favorite directional pad ever, inching out the Sega Saturn just slightly. I don't know, something about this one feels more confined and more responsive than the Sega Saturn controller, which a lot of people favor as well.
Now, I'm not too great on this one because I've never used it. However, upon first glance at it, I can already see that because of the 6 buttons, they're trying to complicate games to where the point where we're now at the PS3, and Mortal Kombat requires combinations of X, Y, Z under over 16 combinations. So you can see that this is the precursor to that dastardly bullshit. And honestly, like, the way the controller is shaped, like my boomerang something here, feels okay comfortable. Like, you can wrap the 2 index fingers around it and it's alright. Really though, it's a bastard of number 1, which we'll show you in a moment. It's alright. This is just my first inspection, and that is the word for me in.
At large! Now, bringing this back to the 16-bit era of the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, now, Games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter looked and sounded better on the Super Nintendo, no doubt. But a lot of people favored the Genesis version for Mortal Kombat 1 because of the blood. But secondly, again, I bring up 6 face buttons rather than having 4 face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons. This was more arcade perfect in that regard. So you take a hit on the graphics and sound, but you get a better controller.
And I was correct. Thank you very much. Bringing up those dastardly bullshit combinations. Now for number 1, my personal favorite, Super Nintendo controller. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That is plain, that is fully plastic right there, all the way through. That is a 1/2 inch of plastic, will not break. It's not curved like the Sega Genesis one, so your hand nicely conforms to it. You've got the double trigger, which the Genesis one does not have.
Those aren't triggers.
Well, it's not fine. The left and right
shoulder buttons.
Shoulder buttons, fine. Which I'm not gonna lie, are almost never used, but are there and they look nice. Look at that. Just look at it. And it has basically everyone would hold it like this, so you can easily just kind of fold over your finger. You have 4 buttons with the use of 1 finger. Come on now. That is well placed. And its simplicity is just gorgeous. Like 1 finger controls this entire controller, aside from the D-pad. 2 fingers, fine. No other controller can boast that.
Yes, and obviously this is the most influential controller of all time because a lot of people favor, bringing this up, the DualShock. And let's just hold these side by side here. I'll even do a close-up so you can see, hey look, it's a goddamn Super Nintendo controller with handles and 2 more shoulder buttons. And obviously the analogs added in at a later date. PlayStation didn't originally launch with that. But if you know your history, you know why the PlayStation controller looks a lot like the Super controller.
Because it was one of the most successful systems of its time. Not definitely the most successful, the Super Nintendo.
Of its time, I believe it was the most successful console.
For sure.
But that is the top 5 controllers that we've chosen that we feel are the best, our favorites, however you want to interpret it. But I have to give one shout out to one special controller that was just nudged out of it. And a lot of people think this is, again, one of the most fucked up controller designs ever, and that is the Nintendo GameCube. Now, looking at it, the thing is a goddamn monstrosity. There's no doubt about that. However, when you hold it, everything's exactly where you need to be. The main button is always A, so it's nice, it's big, it's dominant. B, the Y and the X are all aligned right around the A, literally molded right around it. It's very nice. The C stick, very responsive, and I love that it has this hexagon shape around it, so you just like hear that noise going in 8 directions. I really like that. The analog's the same as well. And I find the analog on the GameCube is a lot more responsive than the DualShock controller or any other type of analog controller that's out there, like the Nunchuck or something. The shoulder buttons, everyone has the same gripe, and that's just pressing them down doesn't do a whole lot. You have to press them down, then hear that click. That click means it's working. And it could use a second Z button. That's about it. And that's why this was just barely nudged out of the top 5.
I only use this briefly because, I'm not going to lie, the left and right shoulder buttons really pissed me off. And honestly, the GameCube only really interests me for Zelda Wind Waker. And maybe Pikmin, because I don't know why everyone loves Pikmin.
Because it's fucking awesome.
I'm one of them. The D-pad was on here just for looks. It was almost entirely useless.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
No purpose why that little testicle was there. See, testicle, clearly. Yeah, other than that, all the buttons, like, they kind of tried. See, I can't shift my thumb and hit all the buttons. I'm not a fan of that. Overall, I think this was bumped for good reason, but that's just me, and the Z is completely out of place there. Like, if you're holding this, you're probably holding it already half-cocked because you know that you have to press it down all the way. So then you can't kind of slide your finger over because there's a nice little ridge there.
So yes, that concludes our top 5 picks for greatest controllers. And at the end of this episode, which is going to be in like 10 seconds, we actually have a new theme. So I hope you enjoy it. Bam.
Now go ahead and leave your comments. But if you're going to leave comments about whether a controller was left out, leave your comments on why it was good, and then maybe we'll get back to it.
We'll totally get back to it. I have nothing better to do.
Anyways, that's us signing out.